Good morning, everybody. I hope I'm audible.
Good morning. Yes.
Yeah, we're just waiting for everybody. I think we had more registrations, so we are just waiting for everybody to join in. We will start within 2-3 minutes. Just when the confirmation will receive that everybody has joined in. Just bear with us for another 3-4 minutes. Thank you. I think we should start now. Good morning, everybody. I hope I am audible, and I hope that you all can see the screen. If any one of you is finding any difficulty for listening or even to access the PPT, please let me know so we can get it arranged before we start and delve into the presentation. I hope everybody is able to listen. So I'll take the presumption that everybody is able to listen. So good morning, everybody. I am Gibran Ahmed Tak. I am from AJMS Global. AJMS Global is one of the leading consultancy we have in Dubai right now. We are in collaboration with Dubai Humanitarian, and we are hoping to deliver this webinar on AML CFT and UBO awareness. During the presentation, it's going to be a little bit long presentation, and I will try to keep it uh, as exciting as interactive as I can. And during the process, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to ask me any questions. Although we have a Q&A at the end of the session, but in between, if anybody has any questions, please feel free. It will only help me to understand better to how to deliver this presentation to you. So just to give you a brief background of what we are trying to achieve today is to establish a basic understanding of what the AML and CFT requirements and compliance requirements are. I know everybody must be aware of it, but at the cost of repeating myself, I will just give you the full form of AML and CFT. It's called anti money laundering and counter financing of terrorism, and UBO requirements. UBO means ultimate beneficial owners. As we are aware that in 2017 and 18, a lot has been done on the uh, enactment of the law of AML CFT law. We had federal decree of 2018, and then we had cabinet decision of 10 of 2019, which primarily deals with the anti-money laundering compliances and anti-money laundering law. And as of today, we have it as AML CFT law and AML CFT decision. Along with that, what we had was UBO regulations and compliances. Now, what does UBO regulations and compliances mean? It basically means to identify who is the ultimate beneficial owner of an organization, of an entity, or an FI, or an WASP, or any DNLP. So now, what do we want to achieve by figuring out who the ultimate beneficial owner is to understand how the who is the ultimate beneficial, who is getting benefited with this business or with these transactions, because at the end of the day, you have to you have to establish a better understanding, a broader understanding of the entities and the organizations that you're working with. Now, keeping that in mind and keeping the requirement that in mind, Dubai Humanitarian is trying to understand and is trying to make sure that all the members should have a better understanding of how this AML CFT UBO compliance framework works, and how does the landscape has updated or developed so far, and what is the requirement, what are the basic requirements that we all need to follow, what are the basic understanding of what needs to be followed. So if if for example there is an a recent amendment in the law, if there is a recent requirement which has been updated, the intention of today's seminar is to be able to communicate to all the members, to all the people who are joining today, so that we all have a similar and a clarity on the requirements. And with that intention, let's dwell little deep. I would want you all to just have a look at the contents of what we are going to discover today and deliver today. We are going to have a discussion about the regulations and legislations which are regulating the United Arab Emirates AML law. I'm going to tell you in brief what are the compliance checklist, what are those ABCs, what are those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 which you need to have ready, what is your essential obligations when we're talking about AML, and what is the scope of AML CPF inspections by regulatory authority, because multiple authorities have been inspecting the compliance of AML CFT. I will try to give you the better understanding of UBOs, because the concept of UBOs has recently been updated in November 2023. UAE has come up with two new amendments in the law. One is called 109 of 2023, and other is 132 of 2023. Both of them related to the understanding and implications of fine regarding the ultimate beneficial owner. There are specific requirements how an entity or how a company has to ensure that how are they maintaining and complying with the regulations and the requirements of ultimate beneficial owners. Then I will try to discuss briefly about administrative fines and penalties. Then we will go to the targeted financial sanctions and screening, and then we will let the floor open for questions and answer session. Now, before I dwell into the technicalities and everything, I want to understand and I want to communicate that to you. I don't want it to be a very generic a training section where one person is just going on with 1 2 hours and just delivering this. I want you to sort of allow me to ask you certain things so that I understand where we all stand. Allow me to have a better understanding of how the audience, how what my audience is right now. From that perspective, I would request you to feel free to unmute yourself in between and let me have your understanding of what I'm trying to explain so that I understand better to deliver this message in a way that it is not generic, but it actually makes an impact by the end of this session. So to start with simply, can anybody here would want to shed some light or give me a brief about what they understand about money laundering. And I would impress upon it. I would feel very, very obliged if you guys can, interact in a way that it is helpful by the end of the session. So, if anybody can give me any idea of how the AML or how the money laundering works, or what is your understanding of money laundering? Anybody? Maybe later in the session we can have much more uh, involvement of all the members, and at least we can try to make it little more interactive than the other sessions we might have on this subject, because the subject in itself is quite lengthy. It's quite uh, technical, so to say. Anyways, so what is money laundering? Money laundering basically, and as per the law, means a process by which any financial proceeds obtained from unlawful activities is integrated into legitimate economy. Now, what is unlawful source? Can be dirty money. There are multiple names which are in the market: dirty money, black money, oh, it's drug money. But what does it do? Money laundering, what does it do? The process of money laundering is when I'm taking the financial proceeds from illegal activities. So let me be very clear. For any money to be dirty money or black money or drug money, it has to come from an activity which is unlawful in its own sense. So the first requirement is the money needs to come from an unlawful activity. The source needs to be unlawful. The source needs to be illegal. And whenever I obtain any financial proceeds from such source, and I then try to bring them back into the financial economy, legitimate economy, that is the whole process while I'm creating funds from illegal activity and then bringing it back to the legitimate economy to disguise that from where do I, from where have I brought this money, is called money laundering. Money laundering, as the process suggests, includes of three uh, stages. One is placement, then is layering, the third is integration. Now, what is placement? Now, placement happens when I have already created a fund out of an illegal source. Now I am placing that money into some asset, into some activity from where I can integrate, where I can layer it with multiple financial transactions so that my origin of that proceed, the origin of that fund can be hidden, can be concealed. While doing so, what I'm doing is I'm also integrated into back into the financial system. So the concept of placement layering integration is nothing but a technical aspect of putting my money in a system where I can conduct any activity, ensuring that uh, illegal money is layered in a way that it conceals the origin of these funds. And by doing so, I am integrating them back to the legitimate economy where everything appears normal, as it's a business or a personal transaction. Now, that is where money laundering takes place. So, if I may ask, is there a possibility that money laundering can happen without any of these three stages? The possible answer is yes. The reason, the basic reason is money laundering only happens when there is an illegal source of money which is coming into the economic system. It may directly be by somebody might just be making small transactions of illegal money and directly depositing into the bank. It may be below the threshold, but it is dirty money which is getting integrated. So I am ignoring my placement layering. I'm just simply coming below the threshold, putting the money in. So it is very important for all of us to understand the concept of money laundering stems and comes from the concept that there has to be an illegal activity which is deriving me some financial proceeds, which I'm trying to put it back into the legitimate economy. Now, what are financial crimes? Financial crimes basically are the general term that covers various kind of criminal acts that involve money or other financial instruments. We have financial crime across board. We have seen cybercrime is there, embezzlement, tax evasion, bribery, corruption, drug trafficking, fraud, trafficking, market abuse, competition with the market players, insider trading, terrorism financing. It takes multiple faces. However, law enforcement agencies have identified certain areas which, given in a particular regulatory landscape, plays a vital role. Similarly, in here, what we are trying to achieve is to understand what kinds of financial crimes are happening around us, which are generating illegal funds, which can be susceptible to bringing in the illegal money into the legitimate framework. Now, let's getting step into directly into the key provisions of what anti-money laundering laws and regulations are. So there are the principal AML CFT legislation remains to be the federal law 3 of 2021 concerning the regulation of fundraising activities. Then we have 26 of 21, we have 20 of 18, we have 10 of 19, we have 24 of 22. We have discussed this already. 10 is the main principal act which brought in a broader understanding of how the AML law would be regulated within the country. Cabinet decision number 10 was the implementing regulation. It sort of gave us the guidelines of how the federal decree of 2018 is going to be amended and how it's going to be implemented. That is why it's called an implementing regulation. Then we have 26 or 21 and 24 or 22. They are basically the amendment to the existing laws. So these 2018 is your principal law. 1019 is your basic principal decision, which gives you the implementing regulations. Now let's dwell deeper into this. Let's start with the applicable AML laws and what it means to us. Let me start with the recent one which has come, which is Cabinet Decision number 132 of 2023. This is basically administrative fines for violation of resolutions which has superseded Cabinet Decision 53 of 2021. There is Cabinet Decision number of 16, which provides for the unified list of violations which will be implemented in case of any violations of AML law. Then there is Cabinet Resolution number 109, which provides us the regulation of the real beneficiary procedures, how to identify real beneficial procedures. Now, there is a difference between this law and the previous law. It superseded 58. 58 was applicable to certain entities. Now, this resolution applies to all corporate entities incorporated in the UAE mainland and in the non-financial free zones or commercial free zones. Then we have Cabinet Decision number 74. It talks about targeted financial sanctions and screening process. This is basically, we will dwell deep into this concept. That is basically identifying certain entities while doing business to ensure that we are not. Is there any question? Is there any question, Mr. Asad? Okay, I think it was by mistake, so I will continue. So, Cabinet Decision number 74 basically talks about proliferation of weapon and mass destruction and its financing. It is a broader understanding of beyond AML. It brings into its ambit terrorist financing. It's an international regulation which we are implementing with by bringing in Cabinet Resolution number 74. We will dwell deep into it later. Then we have Cabinet Decision number 10 of 2019, which are basically the implementing regulations. Now, as we all know that this law in itself in UAE is quite new. In 2016-17, during that period, national risk assessment was conducted by Ministry of by UAE government. During that time, certain sectors were identified which were vulnerable to money laundering, and To name a few, they were defined within 2 to 3 categories. What we are dealing today are the 3 categories of it: financial institutions, DNFBPs, and security or virtual asset IT services companies. Now, financial institution itself includes MBTs, banking finance institutions, finance companies, insurance company, hawala service providers, payment service providers. Now, DNFBPs, on the other hand, as we all aware, is one of the sectors which is being affected the most in UAE right now, designated non-financial business and professionals. They include gold and diamond sector, dealers in precious metal and stone, real estate agents and brokers, casinos, lawyers, trust or auditors and accountants. Securities and security broker deals, vast IT service company, good trading companies are the third set of companies, which usually in layman terms include the forex exchange, your trading companies, your crypto companies. All of those are included in the third. Now, what is the understanding, what is the requirement, and what does the Ministry of Economy wants to achieve and UAE wants to achieve by doing so? What are the strategic pillars and the priorities of the government? The priority is to make sure that we have a domestic and international cooperation. We have a, a, a legal and supervisory framework. We have sharing of information and analysis. We have investigation, prosecution, and confiscation procedures put in place. Now, if you see, all of this may not be relevant or applicable, and that's why I'm going through these documents from the overview concept, is because it may not be applicable to you, but has it plays a very important role in every day of your workings, because these are the things which would at the end of a year define what the strategy of the government is going to be. What is the Ministry of Economy looking at? What is the UAE government looking at? And that will decide how your next session or the next law is going to be. It is very important. Let me give you an example of information and analysis. When we talk about information analysis, what are they doing there? I have been part of those committees and meetings which we have seen. They are analyzing the information that we are providing them. When I say we as an entity, DNFBPs are providing, the FIs are providing, they're submitting suspicious activity reporting, they are doing STRs, and the government on the other side is evaluating and analyzing the data which is coming through. They are updating themselves, the information that we are providing. They are updating the legal and regulatory framework. 58 was there. Why was 58 updated? Because there was a need of understanding, a broader understanding of ultimate beneficial. So that is why it is one of the important part how we do our day to day to ensure that the ministry is being updated in a timely fashion. They are getting the real time updates. They understand how the market is reacting. That is why these procedures, these pillars, so to call, these priorities have been put in place, so that we help the government to understand what are the money laundering investigations which are taking place. What kind of training do we need? What kind of expertise do I require? Because it all happens with analyzing your data. If we as an entities are aware and we are taking measures, we are taking control over our day-to-day activities, we can inform.
Yes, ate.
I think Miss Lily.
Tapos mo na yung trabaho mo. Good. At least makakapahinga ka na.
I will just ensure that this is.
Naman para makapag-enjoy naman kayo. Sabi ko nga kay Kuya Willie, lipat na naman kayo ng
I hope I'm audible now.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, going further, now, once we have identified what is the role that we need to play, what we need to understand, what I wanted to do by giving you the download of all the regulations and the requirements and the information what the ministry is doing is for us to understand what is the role of all of this in our day-to-day activities. How does it affect us? And what is that what we need to do? So far, what I have tried to do is to make you understand what money laundering is in an overview sense. I've given you to understand what money laundering is. I've given you to understand what the laws and regulations so far have been brought in place. I've tried to give you the flavor of what these regulations do and what is that it all has an impact on all of us. The impact is by understanding these requirements, by understanding what I need to do, by understanding what we need to do, we will have to understand what is that the requirement which the government is looking for from us. What is that what we actually need to do? So now I will give you in brief, in pointers, what is the compliance checklist which we as entities and as entities which we are supposed to follow. So now basic practices of for AML compliances of what? We have to have in place our basic compliance fundamentals. Now, what are those compliance fundamentals we are talking? You need to have your policies in place. You need to understand this is what I do. This is what my activity is. This is how I make business. So, keeping that in mind, this is what my framework should be. This is how I interact with as an entity. This is how I interact with my clients. These are the kind of clients I'm attracting. So if I'm attracting a client who is from a higher jurisdiction, I need to ensure that the policy is there so that I can mitigate that risk. See, at the end of the day, what you want to do is two things: to ensure that your government is informed about all the activities that you're performing. Secondly, is to mitigate your risk. Now, what do I mean by mitigating your risk? So, if you are high risk, you are more open to fines and penalties. And as an entity, you also run a reputational risk. As an entity, you run a risk where you have been identified as having a risk to work with. So now these are the kind of things that we really need to look into. How do we look into? What is the possible way? Japan, how do we look into? Okay, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm working with a high risk customer. That's fine. You can work with high risk customer, but have you placed in association with that high risk customer the regulations, the policies, the procedures which will safeguard, which will safeguard which will safeguard what needs to be achieved at. Now, when we're talking about policies, what do it usually includes? It includes conducting your own risk assessment. Okay, this is what I do. These are the clients I get. This is what my money making strategies are. So for them, and this is the law. So I think I should have A, B, C, D in place. And if I have A, B, C, D in place, I am accessing my risk in a way that I can define my policies in a way that I am in compliance with the regulatory requirement. There is something called risk appetite statement, where you identify your own risk appetite. Okay, I am doing this. This is my business model. These are the clients I get. This is what should be my risk appetite. And within this risk appetite, these are the procedures which I have put in place. I will do CDD, I will do customer due diligence at this level. I will identify any customer who is not providing me basic information as high risk customers. I will do enhanced due diligence on them. This is when I will review my due diligence of customers because this is the kind of business I am doing. There are changes happening every month. I will update my database every 1 month. Secondly, I will update red flags of anti-money laundering compliance. Now, what does red flag means? Red flag, as the name itself suggests, these are the red flags to which you can raise your suspicion. Let's say, for example, I come to you and I tell you that I am from a high-risk jurisdiction. Right now, let's say, let's take as simple example as I can be. Let's say Philippines is right now in high risk jurisdiction. I come from Philippines, or I come from Monaco, or I come from Venezuela, I come from South Africa. All of these are high risk customers, high risk countries under increased jurisdiction. Now, when I come to you and I say, oh, I have this cash, I need to make payment. Obviously, cash in itself is a red flag. But how much cash is a red flag? Am I giving you source of fund? Am I not giving you source of fund? And at the end, when I started doing transaction with you at the 11th hour, when you asked me the documents, I said, oh, no, 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 I don't want to do this transaction anymore. Now you're asking me documents. That fact that I denied doing a transaction with you when you asked me documents is a red flag. The fact that I am making multiple transactions under the threshold is a red flag. The fact that I'm coming with you with a specific license activities and I'm giving you justification of a fund from another license activity, that is a red flag for you. It is very important for you to establish those red flags within those policies. And once it has been established, your front end workers, your compliance team, your people who are working on the front end would have clarity. Okay, this falls under this, it's a red flag. Let me escalate to the compliance. Let them decide, let the senior management decide. So all of this would only happen when you have escalated that. If we have not escalated that matter at the time of policy development and we have not dwelled deep into understanding our own business, creating those red flags which are customized to my own business, how do I achieve that compliance which the regulatory expectation is? Third, screening, compliance screening. What does it mean, compliance screening? It means when Gibran comes to you to do any transaction, you need to screen me. When I say screen, you need to see me if I am not a sanctioned entity in my own country. You have to see that do I have a risk of a reputation or a regulatory risk against you? Maybe in the country where we are dealing, I don't have any risk, but in my own country, I'm a money launderer. In my own country, I have spent 3 years in jail. For example, I hope it never comes, but you never know. But that risk is always there. We always run that risk. I can come to you and with a passport which is not even uh, true. I can give you documents which are forged documents. How do you know that these are forged documents? It would only know when you're doing screening, when you're conducting screening on me, when you're ensuring that I am not a person or an entity which would bring along with myself a risk towards your company, towards the products that you're delivering with. A very integrated part of screening is also monitoring. You monitor what I'm submitting to you. You monitor my transaction. You ensure that there seems to be some risk. I need to monitor that guy. Now, how do you do all of this? And I'm going back just to give it a logical end. I do all of this while I'm defining my policies. Once I have defined my policies in a particular way, all of this would follow. My red flags will follow, my screening process will follow, my monitoring will follow. And then comes the most important part of all, risk management. Now, it is a very sensitive topic and it needs to be understood in a way. So ministry, while giving out the law, never said you can't do business with ABC. They said while you are doing business, you have to ensure that your risk is mitigated and managed. A lot of people, and I've seen a lot of entities, they don't understand this concept and they end up saying, oh, there is no, let me take cash, there is no barrier on, there is no stop on cash, there is no stop on credit. No, that's not what they mean. They mean if your risk does not allow you to do so, how can you do so? You have to manage your risk. Now when I say manage your risk is what? Let's say for example, I am a company who does transaction below the threshold. So I say, oh, I am doing transaction below the threshold, I will not do screening process. Because I'm under the threshold, I don't need that detailed screening process and monitoring process. But what happens there? What happens there is, let's say a person walks to me and says that, Gibran, I'm a person from a non-high risk country and I want to do transactions with you, whatever the transaction may be, and the transaction would be all below the threshold. Okay. Let's say, for example, in 1 year, I have not screened him. I have not done his monitoring. I have doing transaction with him because he's from a non-high risk jurisdiction and he's doing all the transactions under the threshold, but all the transactions are in cash. But I say, oh, the law says I don't need to bother myself if it is below the threshold. I don't need to screen him. It is below the threshold. And I do, let's say, 15 transactions with you below the threshold. How are you mitigating that risk? Because the concept is I don't have that risk, I'm not doing it, but there is an in person who may be doing the same thing with you, who is laundering money through you. How do you know? Because there is no process, there is no practice that you're following towards AML compliance. That is where risk management comes in. Management of your own risk. You understand this is ABCD, boss. These are my four corners where when I will be doing my business. And one of the very relevant part which has come in recent past, in last 2 3 years, which has been developed, the technology aspect of compliance in AML. Now you have screening softwares, you have transaction monitoring softwares, you have risk management softwares. Although the red flags and the compliance part may be still done manually because there is no concept of doing it, writing a policy through technology, but I'm sure that one day we will achieve that also. But as of now, what we have a screening process which is already automated. We have a compliance monitoring process which is already automated. There's a risk management process which is already automated. Now these are the best practices. These are the best practices. Obviously, the technology aspect is always correlated with uh, the financial health of the company, but it's not mandatory, but it is always a best practice. But everything else is mandatory. You need to do screening. You need to identify red flags. You need to do compliance monitoring. You need to have your compliance fundamentals. Now, what I was discussing, now I will go down and dwell into deep. What are those compliance fundamentals? What are those compliance? We were talking about best practices. What is that obligation that you need to achieve? I have discussed I think I have discussed in deep what the AML CFT policies and procedures are. It can be anything. It can simply be your risk assessment. It can be your risk appetite statement. It can be your policy manual. It can be your customer due diligence process. It can be about how you deal with red flags. It is accumulation of whatever you have assessed, identified, and discussed that this is what I'm going to do. This is your AML CFT policies and procedures. What is obligated into it is and your risk assessment. You have to do your risk assessment. You have to identify your risk. Second is your AML policy. You have to identify your policy procedures. You have to have in place your CDD. You have to have in place how you deal with PEP. You have to have in place how do you do reporting. It is non-negotiable. And there are corresponding fines to that. We will come to that. There is a GoML background and registration process. So there is an portal, FIU portal, which is called GoML. You need to be registered there. There need to be a person identified as MLR who will undertake all the responsibilities of filing the relevant reports and transaction upon there. The third part is customer acceptance and onboarding process, KYC, know your customer due diligence, ongoing due diligence. That needs to be done. When you bring in your new customer, there has to be a journey, a start to end process from compliance perspective. And all of this has to be risk-based approach. Like we discussed, you have to identify that risk. This is my risk, and based on this risk, this is my approach. Then TFS and PEP screening solutions, it's mandatory. We talked about screening software. Then you have UBO obligations. I will go deep in UBO obligations later on in the slides, not right now. But UBO obligations precisely means you have to identify the ultimate beneficial owner of the entity or a customer with which you are doing any business. You need to have a compliance officer and MLRO. It is mandatory to have a compliance officer and MLRO. You need to conduct training and awareness annually, biannually, depending upon the risk you have identified. Annually is must. Every new guy which joins in needs to be given training within 30 days. There has to be an undertaking by that employee that I understand AML, I have read the AML policy, I have understand the AML procedures, and I buy that I will always follow the law principles of compliance within my day-to-day work. There has to be a minimum record keeping of 5 to 6 years, sometimes 10 years also. You have to report suspicious activities, transactions. In the course of your business, you may identify people like me who are coming to you and doing business under the threshold, as I gave you an example previously. So you have to report me that, oh, this guy may not be from high risk, but he is conducting so multiple transactions under the threshold. I think there's something suspicious. Now, reporting suspicious activity is not, you're not a policeman. They're not expecting you to be an investigative agency. What you're doing is you are reporting your suspicion, not the finding. I have a suspicion. Why do you have a suspicion? Oh, he is from this country. I asked him this document. He submitted me this document. I analyze his risk. I come to this conclusion. As per my understanding, I think it might be suspicion. The ministry might not think it as a suspicion. The FIU might not think as a suspicion. But you have defined your system in a way that provides you that the guy who is doing multiple transaction under the threshold is a suspicious transaction. I need to report it. Now there are multiple questions which we have prepared, and we want which we usually get asked around, and I wanted it to be involved here also so that uh, we are going into the right direction. Before I go any further, I hope so far I am not going too fast. I know I'm making any sense to all of you guys, and it is relevant for you. If not, please feel free to let me know. Anybody, any input, any feedback, anything you want me to uh, focus on. It is important for me to know.
I have a question here.
Yes.
Since in my organization, we're a nonprofit, basically implementing humanitarian development projects. So it's a fairly similar profile to many of the members of Dubai Humanitarian. So in our situation, we're not really buying and selling services. Most of our concerns with corruption or funding of terrorism is focused on purchasing and procurement style things. But in a money laundering framework, the potentials are a contributor of someone funding a project could be from one of these backgrounds. But if you're dealing so that would be the primary thing. But is there other risks someone with our profile should be looking out outside of project contributors or funders?
It can be okay. It can be multiple ways. So what we have understood so far is the abuse of NPOs are at the high risk. If I've understood anything from what the recent risk assessment have told us in national risk assessment of the government, both at multiple level. If you can just pick up an FIU Financial Investigation Unit a paper in 2022, they have listed out multiple red flags, and they have discussed in depth, in detail, how NPOs are open to abuse by these players. It is not only terrorist financing, it is not only people trying to fund their black money through the projects, different projects. And if you can allow me, I can just I would want to, it's a very relevant question that you've asked, and if you allow me, I will show something with the public at large here. So this is the latest. This is the one which I could just grab. I hope everybody can see my screen. So the latest 2021. It's not the latest one. It's 2021. FIU has come up with the red flag indicators and NPO related how they are abuse of non-profit. How the abuse is happening and what the expectation, what the red flags indicators have explained us so many times is that uh, that other than the risk of being open to terrorist financing, there are multiple channels that they are exploiting to uh, escape asset freezing. They are trying to escape those legal channels, and there have been instances where people, and I can't name the entity, but recently what we have seen across is that uh, uh, not in the NPO sector, but in the other sectors, that there has been transferring of funds from one entity to another entity only to avoid taxes, only to avoid other money laundering related offenses, those predicate offenses, those financial crimes which we were discussing earlier. So in addition to that, there have been intensive cash transactions which have been come across in NPOs. There have been instances where the funding is being done not only aspect from larger transaction values, but within the threshold, where you have had people who are reluctant about sharing their details of people who are controlling them. There have been organizations who have uh, within the within the four corners of doing something noble and social. There are people who are hiding their identities behind those NPOs. So more or less, yes, I understand the the requirement that we are not conducting multiple or cross-border transactions. It's very limited, but at the same time we have to be very much aware of what is happening around. We may not be conducting as an entity much of the activities, but we are open to such threats, we are open to such abuse. And it is only, as I said, that the whole concept of money laundering is risk based approach. That is what we are doing right now. Also, we are assessing the risk, we are identifying what we may be open to, what we may be able to, what we may be able to have risk of, and we might have that risk, and we need to understand that beforehand and put in place those practices in place, so that tomorrow we are not open to any sort of fines or penalties. I hope the answer was relevant to your question.
Yeah, what I'm trying to identify is if we're going to do a policy review to identify vulnerabilities for money laundering, given our profile and the nature of the business that we do, essentially receiving contributions from institutional or charitable donors, and then implementing a stated project in another country or in a vulnerable area, where do we need to target our concerns or our compliance or our checklisting? It seems to be predominantly at the inflow of income is the predominant piece. Some of that's simple when you have an institutional donor like a Swedish government or something like that. But it's so we're just trying to narrow the field. It's okay if we focus here, look at this, we ensure that the income that we're receiving that's going into a legitimate project passes these basic checklists, then we can say that we've done our due diligence in this area. So I didn't know if there was any concerns on the opposite side, if there, as far as the beneficiaries of the project, if there have to be some proof within the UAE system to show that those are legitimate vulnerable beneficiaries, or they're in no way connected backwards or wrapped back around to the originator of the funds or something.
So I think your question in itself had got a lot of clarity also. So if I've understood correctly, that yes, there are multiple projects where people just simply make charitable donations and all of that. And then what I've understood from there is that there are multiple, the clarity on understanding that UBO requirement within the UAE framework. So I'll try to give you 2, 3 examples. You are the better one to guide me on this if my example is relevant to you now. So let's say, for example, I am working in an organization I'm running an organization which has no uh, regulatory risk within your regulatory landscape. Let's say I am working in an A country and you're working in a B country. What I'm doing in A country may not be a risk to you in a B country. There is no regulatory, there is no predicate offense. It does not amount into any offense, any kind of activity which I'm doing in A. But once I'm transferring, let's say when I'm making a charitable donation to you in B, there may be certain areas which, while now the first requirement is you need to conduct due diligence, which is non-negotiable. When you do conduct due diligence, you will ask me, Gibran, you are doing this charitable donation, but I need to know the source of your fund, and I also need to know who the UBOs are. Now, source of my fund, I may say, oh, I am conducting these many activities, but when you go into deeper in my understanding of due diligence, you may find that certain activities which I'm conducting in my own home country may amount to any offense in my home country. Okay. Now, the charitable donation which I'm doing may be completely fine. I'm doing it through right channels, but the fact that my source of fund may be corrupted. Okay. A, there has to be some procedure to address that. B, when you ask me, Gibran, who are your ultimate beneficial owners? And I might give it to you some people who are not even my home countries. They are residing in some international countries. They are international figures. They are international people living in multiple different jurisdictions. And those people there are conducting certain activities which are offense in my home country and in your activity country. So when we have a certain kind of web around which may make you today a tool of abuse through multiple channels. So that I'm trying to bring it back to the conclusion that is why all of these information, all of these queries, investigations, analysis is important for you to achieve and to have certain mechanism within yourself, because there have been transactions where multiple entities have been working in a way that uh, okay, I'll give you one more example. 24th January, EU and OFAC had imposed sanctions on more than 300 entities, and out of those 300 entities, 10 to 15 entities were working on the pretext of providing humanitarian aid in Ukraine and Russia war. But when it was found out that those charitable donations, so to say, were not actually charitable donations. They were being used to fund weapons, and it's an OFAC and EU news. 300 entities were banned. So now, in that case, the only criteria that they were open to abuse were, in addition to being favorable to that kind of business, second was that the failure to have these mechanism in process. Because what was identified later on was that out of those 10, 5 were Russian. The 5 some people were dealing with oil, some people were dealing with gas, some people were dealing with weapons already. They were uh, defense contractors for Russian government and all of that. So now, at why it make it relevant for us to know? Because if that entity would have red flag indicators there, if they would have a screening process, because they were already a part of the process where they were identified as high risk, they would have put in place the relevant risk management framework. They would have conducted the due diligence in a process which was efficient, not just which would just ensure that, oh, I have received all the documents and my due diligence process is done. No, it has to be efficiently done in a manner. So all of that information, all of that web is very tricky for us to sometimes even go beyond. So that is why the thresholds, that is why the requirements, whatever we may call it a UBO requirement or we call it a due diligence requirement, it has been put in place. So at least we make basic clarity of our due diligence process. Now, going further, that is why these questions are very important. What type of KYC records do we have? What is our screening mechanism? Is the customer due diligence process efficient? What am I analyzing when I'm collecting and gathering information? What kind of red flags I have identified? Am I conducting any monitoring of transactions later on? Am I doing any reporting? Is my risk management framework implemented? Is my staff training conducted? All of these questions are very important to answer, and we must do an inherent check all of these things later on. What is the essential requirements I have discussed? We have a risk assessment and methodology. We need to have screening tools which will help us to identify the entities. Now, there are multiple screening tools in market. There is Refinitiv, there is LexisNexis, there is KYC Digi, there is Remitex. All of these are very efficient screening tools which will help us to achieve the similar results. Now, the risk assessment, what we are like we were discussing right now, risk assessment about following factors. What are the risk I'm open to? First of all, if we have individual and corporate, we have tried to identify country risk. Which country am I from? What is my primary nationality? What is my alternate nationality? What country of operation? What is my country of incorporation? Are any of those nationalities or countries identified as high risk or low risk by FATF? FATF is a financial action task force which identified certain entities every 6 months to be in a gray list or a black list. In other words, it's called countries which are subject to call for action, countries which are under increased monitoring. So there are 21 countries which are under increased monitoring right now. There are 3 countries which are under call for action. Call for action. Russia has economic sanctions on it. They have been kept out of the both the list. However, they are not under any list, but it's a very tricky position where the Russia stands right now. In the 3 countries, we have Iran, North Korea, and Myanmar. And 21 countries, they get updated every 6 months. On recent last month, they were updated. 2 countries were taken out and 2 countries were brought in. Monaco and Venezuela was brought in, and Jamaica was taken out along with another country, which I right now can't remember the name. Now, other than those country risk, what is the customer risk we are looking at? Are we looking at any PEP, politically exposed person, the person who is working, we are working with, or is an ultimate beneficial owner of a company? Is he a politically exposed person or not? Is he on any watch list, or is a potential or a confirmed match with any of the entities which, or any of the individuals which have been put on the sanction list? That also is a risk that we are running at. What is the delivery channel risk? What kind of channel partner we are engaging with? Is what kind of direct channel we are delivering with? What are direct delivery we are dealing with the risk? What kind of product, service, transaction risk do we have? What is the payment method? Cash, crypto, virtual asset, NFTs, trading. What are those risks which we are engaged to? All of those are play a very relevant and valid role in risk assessment of considering the risk factors. Now, risk assessment, risk scoring methodology. What do we do with all that information when we gather all that information? Who is this person? Where is he from? What does he do? From where does he? What is the mode of payment? How is he delivering the services? Based on all of that, you assign a risk methodology to all the customers. If any customer, after doing the assessment, is low, you apply simplified due diligence measures. If there is a medium risk, you apply customer due diligence measure. The difference between CDD and SDD is a simple KYC form, to be practically a simple KYC form and certain minimum documents. But when you're talking about customer due diligence, we might go a little deeper into that understanding. And anybody who is beyond medium risk, medium high risk, or high overnight risk, which can be people from any high risk jurisdiction, people who have a very high risk mode of payment, people who may have an activity which is high risk. From them, we need to conduct enhanced due diligence. And whenever we talk about enhanced due diligence, please ensure we're talking about source of fund. We're talking about getting to the source of the fund with which the transaction is being undertaken. These are the kind of 4 risks we have in the risk scoring methodology. And now there are illustrative factors and risk which we may have of what kind of high risk and low risk are. High net worth individuals are high risk. Retail customers, individuals are low risk. Recognized stock exchange companies are low. Not recognized stock exchange public held companies are moderate. Privately held companies which are operating are low. Non-operating companies are moderate. Bearer share companies are high. Government entities, domestic is low. Medium risk countries are moderate. High risk countries are high, and higher risk countries are higher. Similarly, if you can see on the right hand side below column, there's a geographic and operation rating. High risk countries, FATO blacklisted. You can't do transaction without the prior permission of the your concerned FIU. Then you have gray list, that means high list. You have to conduct enhanced due diligence on all of those gray list countries. Moderate risk countries, medium and medium high, you have to conduct customer due diligence, and low risk, you have to conduct SDD. Now, what does it mean when we are talking about screening? What is the risk-based risk assessment based on AML CFT guidelines? What is the screening process? Screening of the customer, beneficial owner, beneficiaries, controlling persons to screen for the applicability of TFS, particularly in high-risk situations, to identify any potential adverse information such as criminal history. Now, the first of the assessment, the risk-based approach, is to identify either if they are aligned with any sanction entity or they have any potential adverse information related with them. Then we have charitable organizations should also take measures that include implementing screening system which screen customers and transactions information for matches with known PEPs. A lot of times we have seen that a lot of current active politically exposed people are related with a charitable organization. Now, in itself, it's not something which has been banned or something which has been negated by the government, but it always brings with itself a little bit of risk which we need to mitigate, and which we can only mitigate if we are aware of the risk associated with that. And the way we can be aware of the risk associated is by conducting a proper screening, to follow a proper screening process, to undertake certain measures which are relevant. To ensure a high level of competence in AML CFT programs, they should formulate, implement policies, procedures, control with regard to staff training, screening, customer-facing staff, AML CFT compliance staff, senior management, and board of directors. This is something which I have already discussed, that to ensure that we are ensuring high level of competence, we need to ensure that we have policies and procedures in place. We have done our due diligence. We are conducting trainings. We are screening our internal staff. We are ensuring that customer facing staff, the frontline staff, is updated. We have a dedicated compliance staff, a senior management, a board of directors. Now, all of this is a best practice. Law nowhere says that you need to have a separate compliance function or something. Yes, it has to be independent, but owner of, or the one of the managers can also be a compliance person, but it has to understand the requirements of compliance. So it is not adding a one more layer of burden on the financial institutions or people who are not having a good financial health, but it also, on the other hand, it provides you those tools where you can achieve maximum by doing minimum. Now, transaction screening tools, there are multiple screening tools and there are multiple things that we need to look into. We have to look into UAE local and UN international sanction list. Let me give you a background of that. There are two lists which the ministry puts out under section cabinet decision number 74 of 2020. There is UAE local terrorist list and United Nations international sanction list, UNSC list. Both of these lists have identified certain entities and it is updated regularly as terrorist organizations. You have to ensure that all of your customers are screened against that list, and proof of screening and confirmation of screening is maintained within their customer file. There has to be a sort of, in practical aspect, there has to be some set of document which says that there is no match. for everything other, you have multiple other sources. UN and UAE sanction list is available on the Ministry of Economy's website. There is a specific section, it's called targeted financial sanction. It is dedicated there. But for financial crime, adverse media PEP, you may have to employ free screening softwares which may be available online, or you may have to take screening softwares which are available in the market, because these information are not readily available, but they also play a very vital role. Let's say, for example, I'm a person with a financial crime history. I've not been screened. I'm conducting business with one of my entities which have just onboarded me. They don't know the risk they are carrying, and at the time of inspection, it might come to picture, or maybe later on they may haven't faced some loss because of uh, doing business with me. It may come into any way. It may come in as a fine. That loss may come into as a fine, as a punishment, as reputational risk. It may have any face, but it will always come with some kind of cost. Now, there are some major platforms which I was just discussing: KYC, DG, Refinitiv, DX Compliance, Sanction Scanner, EastNest, Cynic Technologies. These are very well-known brands across the globe. KYC DG it's UAE's own major platform, which has been accepted by a lot of regulators across the board. Now, as I was saying, what is the importance of screening? A, security; B, reputation; third, regulatory compliant. We have already looked into all of these things. Screening is important to achieve all these three things uh, in an efficient manner. Now, this is the jurisdictions which have just been identified. As I told you, blacklist, there are three countries: Democratic Republic of Korea, Iran, Myanmar. They're the blacklist. And grey list has 21 countries. Venezuela and Monaco were added recently, the 7th and 19th. Rest have been there. Uh, all of these countries are high-risk jurisdictions. That means any person coming from these country needs to be undergone enhanced due diligence. There's a process of conducting enhanced due diligence. There is an overall risk factor that needs to be undertaken. But from a bird view perspective, these are the entities, 24 entities which have been identified as high-risk countries. Now, scope of AML CTF inspections by regulatory authorities. If would it be fine if I take a 5 minutes break to just for some time? Is it fine?
Sure, no problem.
Yes.
Sure.
That's okay.
That's
How much
absolutely
longer do you
fine.
think we will go?
I'm trying to go through the as soon as possible. I think if everything goes as per the plan, I should be finished by 12:30.
Okay, that's reasonable.
We appreciate
So
that. Sure.
back at 12:15?
12:30.
No, we will resume at 12:15.
Yes, 12:15.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gibran.
Pleasure. Hello, everybody. I hope we all are back. I will start the presentation again. So, as far as the new regulation I was discussing earlier, cabinet decision of 109 regarding the UBO disclosure. So, what are the disclosure requirements? I have just tried to spell out the regulations requirement so that it is easier for us to understand. All companies or other entities must continue to keep at their registered office a shareholder register, a register of beneficial owners, and a register of nominee directors. Now, this law has become mandatory that every registered office within the UAE, including the commercial free zones, shall have a shareholder register, a register of beneficial owners, and a register of nominee directors. Along with that, the entity must also file this necessary information relating to the shareholder and beneficial owners with the relevant registrar within 60 days from the date of enforcement of this new resolution or the date of registration of the entity in the UAE. So 109 of 2023 made it mandatory for all the people who are registered with the relevant or concerned registrar to submit within 60 days from the enforcement of that new resolution the information regarding their shareholders and beneficial owners along with the nominee directors within 60 days of the enforcement of the new resolution or within 60 days of registration of that entity. The entity must provide any additional data that the registrar requests within 14 days from the date of request. Entities must notify the registrar of any change or amendment to the information provided within 15 days of such change or amendment. Entities are required to designate an individual residing in the UAE whom the registrar may contact in relation to any disclosure requirements and shall provide the registrar with their address contact details, valid copy of the travel document, or identity card. Each entity must take reasonable steps to ensure transparency, obtain accurate information regarding the beneficial owner, and update the information on the registers on an ongoing basis. Entities registered in the UAE which are owned by a company listed in the regulated stock exchange that imposes a requirement to ensure sufficient transparency of the beneficial owner shall be exempted from maintaining the adequate and up-to-date data in the respect of the beneficial. So in a nutshell, any company other than the regulated stock exchange company has to abide by and comply with the aforesaid requirements. Now, those requirements are to maintain a register at the registered office with specific information, to have those information provided to registrar within 60 days of the law or within the registration of that company. Registrar may ask you any details, you will have to provide that within 14 days. You have to notify the registrar in case of any change in UBO shareholder or nominee within 15 days. You have to provide a local individual residing within the UAE with whom the registrar may have a direct discussion regarding any requiree or anything. You have to provisionally keep on updating the registrar of any change or any update which may occur at your end. Now, scope of UBO inspections. Okay, let's start from this. So now, what does the regulator expects from the AML CFT inspection perspective? The previous one was from what are the requirements for the UBO, maintaining UBO register and all. What is the scope of AML CFT inspections? Is you have to conduct your internal risk assessment. You have to have your policies and procedures in place. You have to have the governance structure framework detailed out. You need to have a compliance officer. You need to ensure that cash transactions are being regulated and they are monitored. Customer due diligence has to be conducted, and PEPs need to be dealt with. You have to identify and conduct high enhanced due diligence on all your politically exposed person. So AML CFT has multiple aspects of inspections. It can easily come and say, okay, I only need to inspect your policies and procedures. Or they may come and just simply say, give me all the details of the transactions that you have done in the last 1 year. Or they even come and say that, give me the details of all the clients that you have onboarded in the last 1 year. Do you have a PEP customer? Okay, if you have a PEP customer, are you maintaining the register of the PEP customer? Okay, what was the due diligence conducted on this PEP customer? So from that perspective, it is very important. Again, I've said it multiple times. It is very important for us to understand our own business from the perspective of what AML requires us to do and update and have policies and procedures in place. Now, from the UBO perspective and both of these perspectives, there are multiple things that we need to do. Is continuous monitoring, as I said. You have to ensure that SAR and STR are being filed. You have to screen against terrorist organizations, TFS sanctions and screening. You have to do record keeping, training and awareness. And one of the very important aspect is independent audit of AML framework. You have to ensure that your audit function is independently looked into from AML perspective. Companies may have their audit functions differently, but independent audit of AML function is very important. Now, beneficial owner data required for registry. The entities are required to maintain the following details. List of all beneficial owners who are natural person as per the board resolution. You have to have name, nationality, passport number, date of birth, gender, UAE ID, address, contact number, status of beneficial owner, ownership and control. And wherever the person is on a stock market or government entity is exempted. However, there has to be certain basic details which needs to be followed, not regarding the UBO, but regarding the company. Now, there is another requirement for the shareholders. Similar requirement as the beneficial owner. You need to have the legal person, company name, registration, date of incorporation, and place of registration. What we are trying to achieve here is that they want you to maintain data for your beneficial owner data, which should be accessible as and when the registrar requires. So there are certain requirements of how to maintain that data. They have given that data as requirement within that updated resolution, which needs to be looked into, needs to be updated. Your compliance function has the responsibility to update that, to update these registers. Now, this is what kind of UBO partner and shareholder registration sample can be. This is not. This is only from a best practice method. It is not something which is mandatory. It is only from a best practice standards. This is what we have over a period of time adopted and companies have adopted, but it can be a good example or a sample for how the data needs to be created or collected. Now we have gone in detail the requirement of the KYC. I have said that we need to understand and identify the client. We need to understand the business nature and purpose of the client relationship. We need to identify who are the beneficial owners and legal representatives. I had discussed that the source of fund and asset is important. We need to ensure that PEP status or negative reports or adverse media information is looked into. We have looked into the ongoing monitoring aspect of also. There is an ongoing respect also. When you are dealing with legal entities, what do we require? Because majorly companies like us, we are dealing with legal entities. We need to have their full legal name. We need to have their UBO legal names, details of authorization person, their incorporation date, contact detail, trade license, ID of authorizing person, including power of attorney. Memorandum of association or article of association of the company is very important. Now, for public benefit association and NGO social solidarity funds, we need to have request for publicity of an association, status of the association, statutes for the associations, minutes for the founders meeting, minutes of the meeting of the interim committee, decision of the interim committee, list of founders, self-introduction document, request of exemption for founders numbers in case the numbers is less than 20 members, copy of passport plus unified number, copy of Emirates ID front and back. Now, what we have tried to do is to ensure that all the mandatory requirements are there. However, sometimes it can be customized as per the requirements of the client. You cannot have one fit for all. Customer and beneficial owner identification and verification of the company. How do we achieve and how do we come to the conclusion of identifying the beneficial owner? Now, as we have discussed that everybody has to discuss and identify the beneficial owner. It is an important part of the UBO regulation. 109, 2023 and 132 places a higher duty on all the organizations to maintain that. Now, customer due diligence, we have discussed. I have already looked into it. Individual entity, we need to do the identity, what the customer does, who controls the customer. Economic activity aspect, where does the money come from? What is the customer doing with the money? And how are we monitoring the transactions? So two things which we need to identify during the customer due diligence is individual and economic activity. I have looked into the individual, that identity, what does the customer do and who controls the customer. Economic activity, where does the money comes from, what is the customer doing with the money, and the monitoring aspect of it. Why is enhanced due diligence important is because you need to ensure that the source of fund are legitimate and they match with the profile of the customer. There have been times where we have identified that a lot of people have been abusing abusing the process, and they have been doing illegal activities to raise funds and make donations. So that's why we do enhanced due diligence to ensure that any red flag which has identified a transaction as enhanced due diligence needs to be done for who? High value cash transactions, suspicious transactions, PEP, countries from high risk customers from high risk countries, and transactions from high risk countries. These need to be dealt from an enhanced due diligence perspective. CDD, source of fund, plus purpose of transaction is what your enhanced due diligence is all about. Record keeping, 10 years is the requirement for record keeping. So if you are doing a transaction today, for the next 10 years, that transaction is open for inspection. So what it needs to be done, that you maintain that records for the next 10 years within your office, within the registered office space. Now, record keepings have certain requirements. I will not go into depth and details of it, but you need to ensure that the local authority is updated on that. You need to ensure that none of those documents are destroyed or disposed of without the prior permission. Uh, Preservation of donation record is essential for transparency and accountability purpose. If you fail to adhere to these regulations, you may be open to fines and punishments. Proper documentation and storage of donation records are crucial for audit trails and financial accountability. Administrative fines and penalties. You may have, now this is the descriptive, this is from the regulation directly, which it varies from 150, 100 to wherever it may go. So failure of the legal person to create register is around 1,000. Third time, first is warning, then you may end up. So there is a system of how it has been done. So you need to create register, you need to include data as mentioned, you need to include the correctly recorded specific details of the beneficial owner, you need to update the registrar with any changes, you need to ensure that the legal person updates the registrar of beneficial owner, then you have to update the additional information to the registrar as and when then there is change. So similar kind of requirements are there. This, as I told you, there's a 40-day restriction to the entity to inform the registrar. However, there is one more thing which has been brought in, which is maybe very important, that the new decision also gives the right to the registrar to temporarily suspend commercial license in case of repeated violations or until the fine has been paid. Now we have looked into targeted financials. There are 4 to 5 OFAC, EU, Treasury, Canada sanction list, local regulators, and United Nations. Now these are the list in which we need to conduct a targeted financial sanction screening. What do we do? Targeted financials. We need to identify if there are any terrorist organization marked by any of these entities, and if that is so, we need to ensure that we file the relevant information with the concerned FIU within the time limit, so that the funds which are being used can be curtailed. Now you have to subscribe to the system, screen it, apply targeted sanctions, and you need to report it. You need to report TFS measures through GoML funds, FFR, and PNMR. Now, fund FFR and PNMR are just technical terms for if there is a full name match or a partial name match. If there's a full name match, you do a fund freeze report. If it's a partial name match, you do a PNMR. So let me know if you have any questions. This was it for today. And also, I think we have spilled over the time a bit. I've got into certain details, but I hope I was able to convey the importance of AML and the necessity of maintaining the records as far as UBO is concerned. My suggestion to all of you would be to ensure that the basic requirements of AML and UBO are being dealt with. I would request all of you to ensure that the compliance department is updated for the same, and they have been requested to maintain these UBO registers and AML related basic compliance so that it avoids imposition of any fines or sanctions upon any of the entities sitting here today, and it also avoids the reputational risk. So,
I just
if
have
any
a question, actually a
certainly.
comment. So Dubai Humanitarian, formerly IHC, requires us to maintain the UBO register. I suspect as long as, and this is a requirement for renewal every 2 years for our trade license. So I think as long as we are meeting those requirements, we are quite safe. And any request for information from the IHC, we are providing in a timely manner. We should be okay, correct?
Yes, yes, yes. But there
Understood.
is also an addition to that, sir, if I may. Now this is
Yes.
now Dubai humanitarian is one requirement, but registrar, he is your relevant. The IHC is your relevant registrar. However, sometimes the inspection may come from the ministry itself also. So it may be so that you are maintaining and complying with all the requirements or all the information updates receiving from um, IHC. However, it would also be important to ensure and to ask your compliance department to ensure that the same is being done for the ministry also. You may not have to go and update them, but you may also have to update it at your own end. As and when the ministry may ask, you may be able to deliver to them because there is an overriding effect of the ministry always. It happens in the rarest cases, but it does happen.
Yes, this is Khalid from MSF Doctor Without Borders. Because also there's some requirement by Ministry of Finance and there's some requirement by Ministry of Foreign Affairs once you are registered and plus IHC. So is it possible also because first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's very rich, but it's also there's some many questions because of the time also, which it is related to the NGO specifically in terms of collections of the fund, whatever NGOs are depending on institutional fund or in private fund. And as far as concerning MSF, we have all this procedure and policy on place for many years, and it is similar with what has been requested from what you mentioned. But it's still there's some questions when you are speaking about the sanctions, a country under the sanctions of UN, and but in the same time there is the resolutions, and in particular for humanitarian work. So maybe if kind of like a summary, what is could be specifically from all this for NGOs, because so far in the presentation is kind of like a mixed with a business company and NGO, if might say that. Thank you.
I have understood, sir, and to be really honest, this was our first introductory session. Now it would be followed more and more on particular requirements of the members. I would request all of you to send, if you have any questions, you can send those questions to the dedicated email ID. And if maybe tomorrow, next time we will have a very we will make sure that the presentation is only specific to a specific requirement, because yes, I indeed agree that the today's subject was a lot to cover in a short span of time. Maybe next time we will only cover specific requirements of UBO related questions. And maybe if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and send it to, I will request anybody from the IHC office to have a dedicated email prepared. Maybe you can ask those questions there, and maybe we will be able to help you out with those answers and provide some suitable solutions to that.
Hi, Gibran. Thank you so much for the comprehensive and detailed presentation. Would it be possible for us to have the slides? They were very informative. As a copy of this, if we can have, and
Sure, we
also you also showed some document which had some red flags related to NGO. It was a paper.
So that's a public document. You can simply go on FIU website, Financial Investigation Unit website. But I will ensure that you also receive that. Financial Investigation Unit is a economic wing of Ministry of Economy. That is where you submit the GoML is part of FIU. FIU, based on the information which we provide over the year, every year they come up with their assessment, risk assessment, and they take one take one segment, take one sector, and they provide the red flags for that. If you can simply Google it, FIU, NPOs, UAE, you will get the recent data. This was something which was saved on my PC already.
Great, thank
So,
you.
but
So we would,
I will try to get, get that information shared with you through right channels.
much appreciated. Thank you.
If this is all, I would like to thank all of you to give me your time, and I hope I was helpful to give some clarity on certain issues. For any other detailed issue, please let us know as and when you require. We will ensure that we will have these sessions more and more in future on specific points so that the better understanding prevails to all of us. Thank you all of you again. If that is all, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent presentation.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Gibran. So kind of
you.